music in your head is how you're supposed to learn it. What you read, you hear inside you. If you hear it only from outside and you reproduce it by imitation, you're already doing it more like a mother tongue, by ear. The essence of classical music in its notation is that despite of its lack of details, though many are there, it is our only connection with the composition, which means that our imagination, tainted by experiences of others, elders or competitors, at every generation rediscovers the masterpieces of the past or the lesser known music of the past. And therefore, I think it's essential when you become a student of a piece of music is that you first comprehend it before you try to apply it on the instrument. That means look at the proportions, make an analytical survey of each structure, the thematic materials, the modulations. It doesn't mean to be overly detailed in your analysis. It's not like forensic research. It's just about having an awareness of what is that you're going to deal with. And therefore what you will prioritize, the technical aspects, the sections where you need to extract exercises in order to perform well a given articulation, a given chordal progression, a given arpeggiation, whatever it requires, independence of fingers, voicing, therefore independence of intensity of the pressing of the keys, as well as agility depending of the tempo, perceived or indicated, the pulse or the beats, the emotion or the motion. And all of these different aspects are not necessarily separate. I think they are all a nutrition, food for thought towards the understanding of how this musical storytelling, if there is one, at least that you perceive such, if you do, represents a statement in a certain pace, with certain pitches, with certain rhythmic patterns, which all evoke differently psychologically for the listener, and therefore first listener for us who are going to learn it in order to play it, the inner listener, not the one that hears it by somebody else. Of course, the shortcut is to hear it by somebody else to see if you like it, as many students say when they start a new piece after they're assigned it. And I find it very shortcut practical, truly, because time is always of the essence, and you don't know if you can comprehend the music on your own, in your inner silence, just by absorbing the music notes. Basically like reading a novel or a fiction or a biography or any text that is not read to you by any means or people, but just through your own reading and your understanding of the grammar, of the context, of the syntax, of the different levels of comprehension of what it implies. And there are implications that can appear at different rereadings that you decide to find the same thing in a music piece you've already played or started learning. The more you dig into it, the more you see more layers to it in terms of meanings to it, or at least perhaps under the surface, but which are the roots of the causes that you hear on the surface. A melodic line from a harmonic background, a bass line as a structure that guides the phrasing, and then this way the melodic lines, a rubato, more or less, less or more, will connect with the dynamic motion of the bass line. So it's almost not really, but a little bit of an archaeologist trying to read through between the lines. What are the hints? How am I supposed to hold this? If I put the pedal, how will I organize that? If I use this fingering, can I stretch to hold this? If not, I have to arpeggiate it, but on the beat or before. How do I maintain the structure without disrupting the pulse? If I delay notes that I cannot reach? And these are legitimate questions that you bring to your teacher, that you try to find answers through how other people have solved them. But since every hand is individual by essence, morphologically, not to mention the approach of the music, even the same famous pieces played by so many means so many different things to each. And that is something that can be puzzling for a young student, because it appears like it's in the eye of the beholder. You have to take responsibility for what it means to you to play it. Of course, you struggle to play it, you fear to miss it or mess it, or to basically make a fool of yourself in front of your peers or your teachers or your audience, or a fool of yourself in front of yourself for not understanding what is it about. Is it repeated notes for the sake of it, or is it repeated notes because they have a place in the articulation, in the statement? Is it an appoggiatura? Is it a passing tone? Is it a neighboring tone? Is it a punctuation, or is it a structure phrase that bridges further? And you can change mind. You don't have to set it in stone, but it's important to start on your own, individually, take responsibility for what you start understanding from what is displayed. Even if you have a trusted score, because very often today text is the sort of sesame to authenticity, even if it's doubtful because many of the source materials don't exist or are tainted by many passing of times, evolutions, and possibly sometimes triggered differences. And of course, you have the competition between authenticity between editions for some works, each pretending to have the or text, and each having a difference in that, even if it's minute. But ultimately, okay, let's say that you trust the score. You don't have the time as a young student to be a musicologist and do the research into and be able to read eventually manuscript in ancient clefs. In other words, it becomes almost the hole deepens and you enter in it. It's a rabbit hole. The further you discover, the more questions occur, and philosophically speaking, is the quality of the questions that bring you to find how you don't answer them completely. But even incompletely, you reach certain, perhaps short-term decisions of how to approach the piece, and therefore how to find its sound color. It's if it were a sound painting, it's um, soundscape, and then the spacing and the breathing and the texture and the constitution of an atmosphere that ultimately all the details put together create, either as a craftsmanship, either as an artistry where you add your own emotional response to the given striking emotional modulation, or that you assume is such, or what it creates as a colorful expression, if you find that analogy, or analogy with taste, or analogy with light and darkness, analogy with cold and warm, analogy with bitter and sweet, analogy with anything that you want to, unless you want to only think in terms of materially, factually, and intervallically, so to say, the notes and their gestures and their leaps and their organizations, contrapuntally, harmonically, vertically organized, horizontally layered. Truly, music is a language on its own that has its own vocabulary and therefore its own grammar and syntax. But all of it vehicles some psychological emotion or some thoughtfulness that you direct through your playing at a different level of the comprehension of it. You can enjoy the melodic line or assess the harmonic progression or the subtleties of the inner voices. And perhaps it's too much to carry at the same time, and you have to make, therefore, choices of which ones you bring, which ones you don't. And in front of this apparent infinity of options, you can find yourself lost when you're novice and you think, okay, people with experience know how to extract of this score the essence that we hear. And very often, if you retrofit or therefore retro-engineer a piece by having heard it and then discover the score, you realize how the notation doesn't always correspond to what your perception of hearing was. So why is there a gap between the notation and the production of it through craftsmanship, honest performance, or through artistic, let's say, license with the text to a certain or a greater extent? And it's not that wrong to be involved in what you do, nor is it really more virtuous to keep away from connecting to the driven aspect of the piece that makes you play it or want to share it or want to reach it or want to be with it or want to taste it or want to imagine it, dream it, hope it. Basically, it becomes a partner in life, a given piece. And it evolves with your understanding of music as you discover other pieces, and sometimes different styles mirror differently the understanding of this style, even if stylistically it might be wrong according to specialists, because they'll define that this is Baroque or classical, romantic or modern or whichever in between. And then you place Schubert after Beethoven, but is it romantic, but is during the same time, is already classical, but is Haydn Baroque, but he's already classical, and is Rachmaninoff a late romantic, is Brahms a late classic, is Debussy an avant-garde composer, it is true that in their own timelines you have those who were more exploring and those who are more among the creators using the language of their day to express whatever they had to express from their inner world out to us. And once their work exists, all of a sudden, it's a self-evidence to all of us, since a ballade by Chopin didn't exist the day before he wrote it, or improvised it, or notated it, or created it, or crafted it. And now it's like, can't without it. If you're a pianist, you can dislike it, you can adore it, you can find it challenging, or you can challenge yourself to succeed it, and perhaps you can restake that a few years later and say, hey, that's where am I now placed in my path of life. Perhaps I can revisit it and see how at different levels you can see things appear that perhaps were less visible in the first reading, because you have to cope with so much. But this self-evidence of any artwork that becomes co-repertoire in their genre, in their style, in their time period, representative of a composer, of a philosophy of music, of a meaning of transmission. It's all kinds of important elements that come in account, and you think, okay, it might have meant something to the people of the time that doesn't mean to us today, because our acoustics, our instruments, our even capacity of concentration has perhaps diminished, while our acoustics extended, our recording capacity to put music in replayable form was not existing until the beginning of the 20th century. So all of a sudden you deal with music differently because you have access to it differently. As I said earlier, first you read the music, you let yourself inhale the text, so to say, as if you read it in your own inner silence when you read the book. Peopled by all the imaginations that what you read brings you to imagine. And this kind of fantastic read is something that becomes, in the performance of the text of the piece, the response to this initial enmarvelment or surprise or rejection or acquired taste, to organize it in a way that you didn't imagine earlier it should sound, or it should carry itself. Often the devil is in the detail, as they say, and often is in the transitions. It's in the elements where the way the music by the composer is woven, and the proportions, the structures, how the eclosion of the thematic materials comes to surprise you, excite you, unnerve you, repetitively surprise you. And you try to make sense out of it, because inevitably it carries its own meaning, since it's mostly instrumental music without lyrics. Therefore, it's only the phonemes, the sounds, that their gestures, their intervals, their leaps, their directions, and their togetherness, and their consonance to dissonance ratio brings you to express it within the understanding of this language that is vehicled in that time period, even if outside of its context today, far from its context today. Livingly betrayed, willingly or not, or faithfully reproduced, respecting its authenticity, to performing it on copies of instruments of its own time, and imagine how it's supposed to have been heard because it was, and eventually then see, when you go back to the modern instrument, for which it was necessarily, of course, not composed, or through which its message comes out differently enhanced, or perhaps lacking subtlety, or enjoying more power, length of sound, dynamic range, um, perhaps a distraction compared to the element itself of what it is supposed to carry. And so, yes, we enter here in very important subtleties in the comprehension of what the texture that we're going to display is in our mind, even if it's evolving from when we discovered it, since we compared it with others performing it, and then we put it aside and we revisit it later again, and it starts becoming something like a familiar element, which allows us then to not feel like we composed it, but we're so already knowledgeable about its far corners and distant innuendos, which might have escaped some of them to us in the first readings and first performances. So much you can carry at once of complexities in the subtleties, and then just display it, because you have to play it through, and you play through not the elements analytically, you play the display, how it combines, and some sounds with the pedal and the acoustic combine in a way differently from an instrument to another, acoustic to another. It might make you evolve your understanding, and you, of course, then shape your own taste about it. That's how you become critical when others playing your piece don't play the way you like it, you or think you understand it, or you think it's supposed to be. Then you start corresponding to your own interpretation in mirror to what others have seen in the same piece. Of course, when it's a piece that nobody has or very few people have played, then you have more room to explore its demonstration. But when you go through famous pieces with a repertoire, inevitably you compare and you contrast, and then you make a choice. It's the privilege of aging to rediscover how I connected to some pieces when I was given to learn them very young, and now that I'm very old, how the same pieces reveal themselves differently. Not completely honestly, but enough to surprise you in a way that is refreshing and humbling about your ego, thinking, hey, I know the piece, or I know what's about, and all of a sudden, no. You know that you don't, or you will never enough. You do to a certain extent, and you need to have built a solid ground on which you display your interpretation, because you cannot perform in doubt. But you can doubt between performances through a lifetime of partnership with a given piece. As a teacher, as a performer, as a recording artist, or eventually as a musicologist, as a scholar. At all levels, you look at it from different perspectives. It reveals itself to you almost as a new piece. Sometimes I surprise myself watching interpretations of mine from when I was young, and thinking as if I'm listening to a student play on a recording, and starting to analyze the technique and the approach and the finger and the hand and the palm and the articulation of the forearm and the every aspect that any exercised ear of a musician analyzes about what is happening and why it happened, which fingering triggered which this or that, not just wrong notes only, because that's the obvious, but a phrasing, a substitution of a fingering that would allow you to, anyway, this or that. And I'm like, I wish I could teach this person that. Of course, I was very privileged to have had great teachers, not necessarily for the technical aspect of the playing, with the exception of Pierre Sancan, who really helped me with that, to rationalize the technique. It wasn't about the French school, the Russian school, the American school, the whatever, the Martian school. I'm just joking. It was more about approaching the tone and the reliability of the performance on different instruments in different situations. And that was very helpful. But nevertheless, even with that, you remain always alone in front of the piece when you have to perform it, no matter how much you've practiced it, dissected it, practiced every section, subsection, every bar, every connection, if you're meticulous. It's not like because of that putting it together is going to happen sort of by muscular memory reproduction. Certain things, perhaps, some shifting, some distant bass has to be acquired memory of the gestures, because you cannot follow all the leaps going on at the same time with the eyes. But ultimately, I find it very humbling that no matter what, as soon as a piece discovered or played for a very long time is finished to be performed or practiced or revisited, it vanishes ephemerally. Even if you record it, it stays. So yes, it is not vanished. It's preserved a little bit artificially, because the essence of music is to be alive. Is the notation, most of the past was the notation of improvised music, the spontaneity, the flow, the line. And then, of course, the written text allows to organize your thoughts process so that all your voice leadings become better flowing. And of course, if you can do it in real time, is that you think in real time, and that is wonderful. Not only as the composer, if you were performing your own music, but performing the music of the others, not as if you composed it, but understanding the flow of the events as they unfold, and to your expectation or surprise. It's humbling and marvelous, but it requires very strong character to accept that as soon as you've constructed this ephemeral structure that you imagined for so long in your dream practice and lifetime of companionship with the piece, if by some circumstantial grace of the moment, some of the sections of it in the performance of a given moment come out to be like you always wanted it to be. Not great, not bad, just right. It's over after you finish playing. It's evaporated. You cannot reproduce it. You can reattempt it, but you cannot replay it technically. Nothing is exactly the same way. Even if you have the same metronome, if you have the same structural concentration, and you are very organized in the muscular memory, and you have the same fingerings, and you go through the same path to be reliable, no. It doesn't sound the same way twice. So we aim towards the moment that we will be given the grace to honor the muse at the levels of our expectations of the piece, of ourselves, for ourselves, and then accept that we have to try again. No more than the notation is set in stone for the interpretation, nor is our knowledge of the piece set in stone. It evolves with the seasons of our life, the rubato, the repeats, the choices of articulation, the dynamic ranges, the volumes, the breadth of the piece. It's wonderful, mesmerizing, and scary all at the same time, but perhaps mostly enticing. Thank you.